So this week, I'm asking you to challenge yourself and begin to use a framework that helps you to think about history in a different way. And the first thing that I wanted to do was go over a couple of different concepts that are important to how we are going to be approaching the class, as well as to the material that you were introduced to this week. So what is historical and what is collective memory? And in thinking about both of these concepts, I think we often intermix them, but history requires evidence. And while it is not perfect, there is a systematic way in which information is collected to develop a particular narrative. Collective memory, however, often can also involve myth making, that is, things that we remember. And oftentimes this is connected to what many of us think of as nostalgia. So maybe how we think things were, how we think things took place, how maybe the great men of history were the only ones who were engaged in changing the different events that we now commemorate. So history versus nostalgia is something that we are going to be exploring in the class. And from the readings, you should be able to discern when the authors are approaching a particular perspective from a historical or evidence-based approach or nostalgia. Sometimes it's in critique of a particular perspective or a particular way to include maybe different groups in a narrative, and that is going to be part of what will hopefully surprise you or will enrich what you already know about the different periods we are studying. So in thinking historically, the article for this week that talks about how historians can often use the 5 C's to help inform their narratives is really important. We are going to be using this framework throughout our class, and so I wanted to give you some more information and some different ways to think about these issues. If after reading the article and listening to what I have to say, you still have questions, please make sure to post them on the discussion board that I provided for you, or feel free to email me and I am happy to help you with it further. They're not easy concepts, so you may get some, but maybe not others, but we will be looking at these as we go throughout the class, and we'll have a chance to reinforce your understanding of them. So the 5 C's is a historical framework, and it uses things like the idea of change over time. So traditionally, when we see this concept of change over time, we think about maybe how things have changed, right? But it can also be connected to continuity, how things actually stay the same over significant periods of time. In thinking about context, one of the things that we try to understand is how different ideas, issues, or events, including people, may have had an impact on a particular event. So what is going on, the who, what, when of history is usually encapsulated in context. In thinking about causality, believe it or not, can be difficult to ascertain because oftentimes there are many things that will cause particular historical events. And so while one historical factor can affect another, we often find that causality and complexity are connected in really important ways. And so in thinking about historical complexity, I want you to think about all of the different issues that may particularly impact a historical event. Oftentimes it's not just one thing that causes a war, it is many things. And we will be exploring that as we go through our content during the semester. And lastly, contingency. Contingency is one of the most difficult frameworks to really think about because oftentimes we kind of assume that, the outcome that we now know as history was what was supposed to happen, that it is somehow inevitable. But one of the things that you are going to see is that when you think about all of these different C's, things get much more complicated. And so contingency is really about considering how maybe different decisions or events, so for example, how could a hurricane affect a particular outcome of a war? How does disease affect the way in which people experience society at a particular point in time? These are things that we often don't take into account, but that are really important in understanding history. And then more importantly, how do those different things then affect the possible outcomes that could have taken place? Again, a difficult concept, but hopefully you are beginning to get the gist of what it's all about. And like I said, we will continue to work on these 5 C's as we go through the rest of the semester.